Okay, folks, let's get rolling here. Thanks again for joining. It's great that you could be here, and hopefully wherever you are, you're safe and not too isolated, and hopefully you're warmer than we are here in Calgary today. Couple of housekeeping items as folks are coming in. We're going to make the deck available to everybody. So, and there's quite a bit in here. So let's treat this as a bit of a walkthrough, the research findings. And so I'll just give you an overview of what's in there, understanding that you'll be able to come back at it in more detail later on. Sandy asked if I could speak a little bit louder. I'll try and speak a little bit louder. No guarantees though. Hopefully that's a little bit better for you. We are going to record the session as well. So just so you know, that recording will also be available to you as well as the walkthrough of the deck. And so on, I don't know if you've used Zoom for webinars before, but there's a Q&A button there. And if you have any questions along the way, just go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A section, and then I should be able to see those. And then as we go along, then you'll be able to ask questions as we go. So let's use that Q&A session because there's lots of folks on, and otherwise it'll get a little bit unwieldy. Okay, so I want to first of all turn it over to our CEO, founder, and overall amazing person, Sheena Rogers-Pfeiffer, and she's just going to give you a quick introduction. Sheena, you should be good to go.
Great, thanks, Mark. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Mark mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Anstice, and just want to give you a quick brief this research work. We did this in order to better understand the hearts and minds of Canadian consumers during what we all know is unprecedented times, and what we at Anstice believe is a trigger for an entire shift in the world as we know it. We already had glimpses of this transformational change prior to COVID, but I don't believe that anyone on this call has or will ever experience what we're in today. And while a lot of the data available today and that we've seen is informing on the basics, there has been very little to help inform on what we feel is the most important aspects of this shift, which is how humans are changing their thinking, their behaviors, and most importantly, their values. And we believe that your brand and business will only sustain a level of success through this crisis period and on the other side of it by moving alongside the very people who are changing. And so the insights you'll receive today from Dr. Szabo will hopefully help you better predict and understand how to drive behavior change and how your businesses and brands can become part of this new consumer thinking and newfound habits that will be formed. So if you like what you hear today, please reach out to us. We are doing customized insights and strategy work for a variety of different businesses within a variety of different industries. So we're here to help. And with that, you don't need to hear my voice any longer. So I will turn it back to Mark to get on with the show. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheena. I'm just looking at, this is a picture of our office. I'm looking longingly at our office. I remember when you used to be able to go back to your office? Those were good times, folks. Good times indeed. The contents of what we're going to talk about in the overall report are here. We'll talk about objectives and challenges, methodology, overview, detailed findings, and then do circle back to the summary and recommendations. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is we'll make the deck available. It's a long sort of research deck. We're not going to go through the whole thing. So let's treat this as a walkthrough of the full deck, so that when you get it and you can spend some time and linger over it, you'll have a good overview of what's in there. And again, thanks for mentioning that, Sheena. My name is Dr. Mark Szabo. I'm the Director of Research and Insights here at Anstice. Okay, let's get rolling. And again, if you're just joining, there's a Q&A function on the webinar. So just ask questions there and we'll try and get to that as we go. Okay, challenges and objectives. We know that consumers demand meaning from what they buy, but how is that meaning going to shift in a post-COVID world? And so our research objective is to gauge what might bring meaning to people after this particular crisis. And we talk a lot about meaning at Anstice, and it's probably worth talking about why. We find that when you focus on bringing meaning to people as part of what you do, you help them live their own values, which is incredibly important to them. You connect with them for a longer time. You start finding innovative ways to add value to them because you really understand who they are. You start thinking differently about knowing who they are. You look for different things about them than you might otherwise. You start bringing them closer into your planning process, and then your team is able to focus on what really matters. So we find that when we talk about things in terms of bringing meaning to people, those really interesting things start to happen. So that's why we do that. And we also say that you can persuade people without knowing them, but if you're going to create meaning for them, you really have to have some intimate understanding about them. And so that's part of what drove this research was let's get an intimate understanding of what's going on with people right now, so that as we look for ways to add meaning to them, we'll have a better understanding of where they're at. So methodology-wise, got to get this out of the way. So we did an online survey of Canadians. It's not a random sample. And there we did of 800 people, March 19th to 21st. We broke out the generations in the data. So the Gen Z is 16 to 23, millennials 24 to 37, Gen X, etc. So you can see if you go through the data, we broke it out by the generations. And again, as I mentioned, it's not a random sample, which means this is really going to be about looking for opportunities for further research, some interesting findings. They're valid within the respondents, but you really can't extrapolate these to all Canadians, all Americans, or all North Americans, because the population ratios are not going to line up with Gen Pop census data. And as we'll see, there's not a lot of response from Quebec. And so take it for what it is. It's a first look at what's going on out there. It's definitely pointing to some important indicators that are worth looking at. But I think we're going to keep going back at the market with this research just to see where things are going on. But it's a first blush look at what's going on. Here are demographics, just some background. Roughly half and half male. Most folks are 24 to 56 with a good skew up into the upper regions as well. Fairly broad ethnicity, mostly 67% white. Again, not to Gen Pop standards. Household income is pretty well distributed. Good mix of high and low income. Provinces, you'll see Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, mostly. Manitoba, not much at all from Quebec, so keep that in mind as we go through this. And then in terms of people's job roles, fairly well distributed across lots of different industries, which is great to see. So a quick overview, and again, we'll circle back to this. There's 5 points that you want to remember. One is this is all about going back to basics right now. Consumerism is canceled, at least for the time being. Some of the findings are really turning consumerism on its head. Energy matters again, which is part of the getting back to basics. The working from home, in case this isn't hello Captain Obvious, as we all sit in our homes looking at computer screens, we found some interesting insights around working from home. And strangers are a lot more important than they used to be, which is kind of an interesting finding. So we'll circle back to those summaries again, as I said, but I think it'd be great to just go through some of the detailed findings. And the way we organized this were some of the more emotive things, and then we skewed it back at the back end towards some specific clients of ours. So we'll focus on the stuff that's going to be generally relevant to everybody, and then just give a high-level look at some of the more specific findings. So the basics of life. The question we asked here was, do you agree with this or not? The basic aspects of life are now more important to me because of the crisis. And 38% agreed, 29% strongly agreed, which tells you is a good indicator of where this whole thing goes. Implications: when people are valuing toilet paper like prison cigarettes, you know that the nice to haves are going to be less important, at least for now. So we'll see where this goes. And then in terms of recommendations we might make from this particular finding, if you're serving and communicating Canadians, you may want to consider making a clear connection between the meaning you bring to people and the basics of life. How do you fit in a world that focuses on those basics? And as well, how does that impact folks that are now confined to one location or at home? That might be a short-term issue. And as we'll get in with the demographics later, this message is going to skew more towards women. They'll be a lot more receptive to it. Same thing if you've got Gen Z, boomers, and 65 plus are going to resonate with this more. And then skipping millennials and Gen X because this doesn't, it's not as strong with them. And again, like I said, we're going to go through this quickly. Each section has some related facts around the demographics, who are going to be more likely to disagree and resonate with this. For this presentation, we won't go into these details. When you go through this on your own, just know that here's a good summary of the details. And for those that want to get really into the numbers, we put out all the demographic breakdown as well. So again, we're not going to go through all these, but just so you know, when you do get the report, these will be there to support the findings. The second question was, well, all this is over, what's the one thing you plan to change in your life? Over 30% said nothing. But those that did say something, simple outdoor lifestyle was about 15% of them. Going to save more money, take nothing for granted, spend more time with family and friends, take better care of my health, get a better job, be more philanthropic. And then some folks even said they're going to focus more on the brands whose values they share. So this slide over on the left-hand side just breaks down that in more detail so you can see the actual numbers. On the right-hand side, this shows you in their own words. So this is the verbatims from the actual, some of the verbatims from the actual survey. Slow down, smell the roses, appreciate my surroundings more, get myself out of debt, not taking social gathering for granted. Love that one. I love the guy at the bottom, nothing, this is stupid. God bless you, sir, for telling it like it is. I plan to go outside more, houses are stuffy. So this gives you a good sort of look at how people might want to make some changes. So as you're going through this list, if you're going to bring meaning to people that you serve, it's a great way to align with how they want to make changes in their own life. So if you can be part of those changes that they want to bring into their life, if there's any way you can do that, then this is a great opportunity to signal to them that this is important to us, and we're going to make sure to craft our service and product towards you in a way that will help you accomplish that. So if you speak in those terms, it can be quite powerful. I'm going to just pause for a second because there's some folks chatting here. Okay. Any questions yet? Okay, I'll keep rolling here. Again, I'm not going to go into the related facts or the too much of the demographics because you can do that on your own. Okay, the other question we asked was, in this current crisis, what person or company, if any, has been most encouraging to you? And then tell us the story of how they encouraged you. Here's what they said. So most folks said family member. Some folks aren't getting encouraged at all, so nothing applied to them. Other folks said public official, which was interesting, and then friends or neighbors. So really, those were the top three: family member, public official, friends, and neighbors, and then a smattering of others. Some folks said coworkers. Some folks said a company that I know well. So in other words, a trusted brand. Spiritual advisors, strangers, and then some folks even said a company that I had never even heard of before. So this is the sources of encouragement for folks right now, and this should give you a good indication where things are at. Tell us the story of how they encouraged you. Number one was they encouraged me to take precautions. So it was that concern for your health, concern for your well-being that people found really encouraging. Similar to that, helpful advice. Anything that can be helpful in a difficult time is really, really appreciated. Um, the encouragement to just simply stay positive, and just a reminder, this is a tough time, so stay positive, and just that bare fact was super encouraging. Folks also really found constant, clear, trustworthy, updated information was really important, as you can imagine, because it's the unknowns that really gets you. Folks said that when you just by connecting with me was really encouraging. And then some other folks said everyday heroes that they saw, like nurses, doctors, frontline folks, were super encouraging. Folks that gave them spiritual support, family support, and then even practical support. This slide again gives you a little bit more detail about the breakdown of that, and then some verbatims in their own words. It was interesting. The chief health officer is always calm and collected and put things in perspective in a positive way, where you want to do what she's requesting for your own safety. Very impressive. And I think we've seen a couple examples of the health officials have been really encouraging in that sense. So implication, if you want to offer encouragement for your organization or brand, try and target the substance and messaging as closely as possible with those different psychographic triggers. In other words, make sure to leverage as many of those encouragement types as you can. And interesting enough, for those over 65, consider coming across or delivering it as if you are a trusted public official. So Dr. Dina Hinshaw here in Alberta has been basically a rock star because of her approach, and mimicking that and honoring that is a great way to get across for people, especially over 65. For women, Gen X, and boomers, consider openly leveraging your existing relationship with them. These folks said that they really were encouraged by companies that they already knew. And so brands that they were familiar with had a pre-existing relationship that was fairly powerful for them. For millennials and folks with household income under 25K, start thinking about social media and less on existing brand relationships. And again, this just becomes from the demographics, which you can go into down the road. Another question we asked was, what do you find yourself appreciating now more than ever? Family and loved ones, no surprise. Friends and neighbors, not a surprise there. Having a job at home, food and necessities, good health. Freedom of movement was a big one that kept coming up quite a bit. Remember when you used to be able to go to places and there were other people there? Those were good times. Folks also mentioned pulling together. They really appreciated the fact that how, in tough times, people pull together. Healthcare and public servants were mentioned. Those little luxuries that you used to take for granted, live interaction, etc. So those are some of the things that folks appreciated. Again, here's the specific breakdown. Here's some more verbatims about how people talked about that. And as we start looking at how folks are appreciating these sort of basic aspects of modern living, again, this goes back to a lot of the basics. How do we make sure to acknowledge that and understand that as we as an organization, talking to people in our bailiwick and under our care, we understand that it's those not so little aspects of modern life that we really appreciate, and just couch terms, things in those sort of terms. We also have spending changes. So after the crisis, how are you going to spend your money differently? How might you want to spend your money different? Why might you want to spend your money differently? And afterwards, how might you want to do it differently? So are you going to spend it differently? Half said no, half said yes. And this one's interesting. So we forced people to rank these specific answers. So after this, how might you spend your money differently? And the number one rank by far, as you can see, is that folks are going to spend it on higher quality products that last longer. So in times of crisis and turmoil, there's a flight to quality, and that includes products. And so that's an important one. But interestingly enough, giving more to organized charities was number 2. More generosity to random strangers was number 3. And we're talking about, you can spend your money on anything. These were ranked quite a bit higher. Folks also looked at owning versus renting and leasing. So that the idea that I want to have stuff that's mine and that it's really good quality. And then when we get lower down the road, more indulgent things, more material goods, these are the kind of things that you would expect in a more consumer society to be number one, like more stuff, more fun stuff. Now it's quite the opposite. So it's turning things on its head, and we'll see for brands in a second that it's quite similar. Why might you want to spend your money differently afterwards? Well, I need to save and prepare for whatever's coming, right? There's a big uncertainty. I'm going to put necessities first. I'm going to spend less. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm still uncertain about it. I want meaning over things, more charity, improving health, etc. So these are some of the things that they said that came up for them as well. That's more of a breakdown of the same thing, and then the verbatims as well. So if this holds true after the crisis, and we'll see obviously if that does, this turns an indulgent consumer culture upside down in many ways. Less focus on the self, more on goods that last, and generosity and ownership. And in the recommendations, which you can follow along afterwards as well if you want to get into the details, this is going to resonate with some demographics more than others. And this will give you an opportunity to fine tune some of the messaging and some of your approach based on who you're serving and who your customers are. For brand expectations, so once the crisis is over, please prioritize what you expect to see from the brands that you purchase. So again, we did the same thing. We gave them some options. We forced the rank, and this is where it came up. So by far, number one, be compassionate to staff. So in other words, of all of these options, what people want from the brand they support is they want to see how compassionate you are to their staff as number one, more than connect with me individually and give me an easy online purchase, right? These are the things that normally a brand shoots for, especially individuality, right? So it's all about personalization and giving you what you need specific to your needs. Well, maybe that's not a thing. Maybe that's not as important right now if this is true. Number one, be compassionate to your staff. Second of all, live your values beyond just your product. And we've seen that quite a bit, obviously, over the last little while. That's still quite important for folks. And then, but related to that is help me live my own values. It's great for you as a brand to live your values beyond just a product. But if you can help me live my values as well, then we've got something really powerful. As well, demonstrate local connections. A local connection is important. So this, if it's true, and if it holds true, really, again, turns people's expectations on what a brand needs to do kind of upside down. And so I think this is a pretty surprising finding. I'm just gonna, there's a couple of questions here. One question is, there's a low ranking for the importance of retail shops and support local. And I think we're looking a little bit earlier. So I would take that with a grain of salt. And again, just because I think you're talking, sorry, Bob, I want to go back to the one you're looking here. I think that's the one you're looking at. So support local comes up quite a bit just because this is not a ranking. These are just things that people said. And if it shows up here on this one, these open-end questions at all, then it's probably worth paying attention to. The volume of it is interesting, but if it just shows up at all, there's something to it. And we do see quite a bit of support as well here, where if you've got a local connection, that's really important. And we do see anecdotally in some of the data where people are really, really excited about supporting the shop down the street. And so local is actually quite a powerful thing. So I think that's worth keeping in mind. Another question here. Okay, a couple of other sort of larger questions that I'll get to in a sec. Okay, so again, this may turn some traditional brand thinking on its head. It's usually more about that personalized connection, ease of purchase. Maybe this is about bigger things. And I think what we're seeing right now is the crisis is putting people in the mood where they want to look at those bigger things and those deeper values. So for us as brands, the question is, well, do we understand what our values are? Are we living them? And more importantly, how are we actually helping people live their values? And that's not an easy thing to do, but doing that is going to be quite worthwhile. And again, the number one, don't forget, show how well you're treating your staff, because that's incredibly important. Okay, word of mouth. Are you using personal connections and word of mouth more than before to find the products that you need? And 25% said agreed, 9% strongly agreed. So we're seeing some folks are going outside the usual norm to find stuff that they need. And supply chains are being disrupted. There's uncertainty around products. So women and those over 75 are going to be more likely to find the product they need through personal connections. And in the social media connection section down below, we're going to cover this a little bit. But really, you can expect to see an increase in sales drivers outside the usual sort of advertising and corporate strategies. And the role of that trusted friend and word of mouth really seems to be stronger than before the crisis. Again, whether that holds true afterwards, we'll see. But that's an interesting finding. Altruism is another one. Do you feel more altruistic towards strangers now? And 30% said agreed, 8% strongly agreed. About half of folks said, nah, maybe, maybe not. But that was an interesting finding that people would be altruistic towards strangers. And we do see, I think, intuitively where this goes. In faith, we also asked, do you have a renewed sense of religious faith? 17% agreed, 10% strongly agreed, and about 37%, so roughly a third, disagreed with that. So we can't ignore the fact that sometimes in difficult times, people are going to renew their religious faith. Interesting enough, Gen Z over-indexed on this. So, and we see that a lot with Gen Z. They're not the millennials. They're much more like their grandparents' generation. They're a lot more traditional, a lot more, I don't want to say conservative. They're a lot more rooted in basic values. So it's not surprising that they over-index on that. So depending on your brand and your mandate, you're going to want to at least be respectful of religious sensibilities and understanding that when times are tough, people will often go back to that. And then there's some demographic breakdown as well. Just want to look for some questions here. Yeah, okay, keep rolling here. Optimism, what's your level of optimism? Wanted to check this one. So right now, about just under a third of the people were neutral in their optimism. Roughly a third, the rest were either optimistic or pessimistic. Skews a little bit towards more optimistic, which is great. Again, this was last week. So this will be an interesting to watch as we go. But in terms of what you do about this, most people are kind of in a wait and see mode right now. So, for the optimists, give them a reason to continue. And for the people that are neutrals, give them a reason to not give up. And for those pessimists, maybe there's some ways to speak to the hearts more than the minds. But I think this will be an interesting thing to keep in mind as we look at how this rolls out. And then some more details around this. So working from home. Have you worked at home during this crisis? Roughly a third said yes. 42% said no, and 24% didn't matter. So of those 34, would you like to work from home more often after this? So 34% of those, we asked that question. And of that group, about 54 or 50 plus said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And the rest of them said, no, not interested, or don't really care. So interesting that roughly half of the folks that do work from home want to do it some more. And so it's not a win for everybody. And we're all just kind of figuring out as we go. We certainly are at our company. Here's some sort of insight into that. So we asked them to rank these challenges of working from home to get a sense of where that was. So the least challenging things were the technical stuff. video conference, whatever, we're all on Zoom or Teams or whatever it is. Access to files and documents, okay, not a big deal. The things that were concerning were more like missing daily human contact. And, in this context, it's not so much about coordinating task items or, doing the brainstorming, the sort of the ins and outs of the work. It's more about just basic missing that human contact. Um, hard time keeping myself motivated, reasons to get dressed and be presentable. Um, this kind of paints a picture of what the challenges are, and they're not technical as much, and they're not as operational as you might think. And especially this number one, just missing that basic daily human contact. So we look at the workplace of the future, or the workplace of next month, for that matter, and how are we making sure that our folks are getting that daily human contact, and even for introverts. That's super important. So this kind of paints an interesting picture of what some of the challenges are for working from home. I'm sure that we can all relate to this. So implications, let's look at how we're addressing that importance of daily human contact. What are ways that we can make sure that we cover that off? Social media. As a result of the crisis, are you using digital and social media in new ways? So innovative ways they haven't, or novel ways they haven't before, and 31% said yes, 66% said no. So describe some of those new ways. So in some folks just said, well, I'm just using it more constantly. And I think most folks can relate to that. Other folks said it's replacing other communication tools. So less email, less sort of traditional comms tools, certainly less phone. Lots of folks using it for news, connecting with family and friends, getting information on crisis. Some folks said reconnect and get new connections. So I think we've probably all heard from people out of the blues, like, hey, how are you? How are things going? Right? It's just a new way to connect with folks. A lot of folks are using a lot more to work from home. Some folks using it for distance learning and shopping, which is interesting. And then a few folks said they're actually using it less. But again, it's interesting to see the volume here, but if it makes it onto this chart, it's worth paying attention to. Here's the breakdown of it. Here's some verbatims, which are always an entertaining read. And then in terms of implications, so social media has been everywhere across our demographic boundaries for quite a while. But it's the Gen Z and millennials that are really finding the new ways to put it to use. So that obviously merits a lot more deeper study. So as you're delivering meaning to people you serve, Gen Z and millennials can really push the envelope in terms of novel usage for this stuff. Okay, I'm just gonna look see if there's any direct questions. Not just yet. Okay, good. So now some specifics that were kind of for some of our clients and folks near and dear to our hearts. And so I'll go through this a little bit quicker because it may or may not be relevant. But first of all, do you have a newfound appreciation for your utilities provider? And 33% agreed, 17% strongly agreed. So that's a good, what is that? 50% of folks said, yep, you know what? All of a sudden I have a newfound appreciation for the folks bringing my utilities. Women seem to have a slightly stronger appreciation. Boomers and those with household income under 100K might have been the sweet spot for that. But as you look for utility organizations, there's going to be some opportunities here to leverage that. The energy sector, similar sort of question. Have you got newfound respect for people in the energy sector, and why? And 27% agreed, 16% strongly agreed. So these are folks that are saying, all of a sudden, I've got newfound respect for the people working in the energy sector. And when we ask why, basically 4 things. One is they work hard, and that's super appreciated. Second of all, they provide an essential service, which all of a sudden is more important than it might have been a month ago. And we're seeing things in quite a new light. But they also said, these folks risk their lives. Not only does the job tend to be dangerous, but they're out there in the middle of this pandemic doing their work. And that was really appreciated. And some folks said that they've been unfairly vilified over the last couple of years, and it's time to turn that around. So here's some examples and some great verbatims. It's a necessity, so they go to work, put themselves at risk, right? That pretty much sums it up. So interesting sort of findings for the energy sector. And then there's some implications and demographic opportunities there as well. Environmental design. So folks who plan public spaces need to know that people might not want to be too close together anymore. And 40% agreed, 26% strongly agreed. So as we've got clients that design public spaces. Well, how do you design a public space when people don't want to be too close to each other? And how long is that going to linger? It's going to be a huge design challenge. And this is something that the city planners and such are going to need to know about. But that's going to be, I think, a big challenge moving forward. And then we've got some demographic information around how they might want to look at that. I'm just going to look for a couple other questions. Nope. Online education. So when it comes to education, I believe online learning will be a sustainable approach over the long term. So 35% agreed with that, 17% agreed with that. So the respondents are not experts in distance learning, obviously, but there's some patterns that are in there that are kind of hard to parse out. So we're going to have to really go deeper into this. But essentially, if they're serving men under 35K in household income, there's going to be some perception barriers around this. And we also have picked up pockets of resistance within the education industry itself. So for folks that are in looking at online education, there's going to be some demographic opportunities and landmines they're going to have to keep an eye out for. We also asked folks about renting versus owning. If I need a new place in order to live, I'd rather rent than buy. So only 15 agreed and 7% strongly agreed. So most people talked about owning, but for the folks that would want to rent rather than buy, they said things like, well, owning is a bad investment in this crazy time. It's too expensive. The future's uncertain. Renting is freedom. It's a necessary interim state. It's just part of the new COVID reality. Costs are lower. So for folks that are looking at property around renting and owning, the real opportunity here is for folks that are facing uncertainty and facing wage uncertainty. And that may not be the traditional group of household income and age that it has been in the past because of this new disruption. So in times of uncertainty, folks may not want to get tied down quite as much. So anyway, there's more to it there to look at, but there's some interesting insights there. So quick summary and recommendation, and I'll get to some of the questions. So we talked about this at the beginning. Back to basics. So the basics of life are now more important than ever. 67% agreed with this, and the way we read this, what we just read is basics mean family, human connection, altruism, practical support, essential services, public-mindedness, less materialism, freedom of movement, simplified lifestyle, access to outdoors, quality and longevity products. So, again, when you're serving and communicating with these folks, you're going to want to make sure that you make that clear connection between the meaning that you bring and the basics of their life, because that's going to play right now and likely for the next little while. Consumerism is canceled. So again, we talked about their ranking of brand expectations was counterintuitive, and the number one being show me how compassionate you are to your staff, and I think that really speaks volumes. We talked about their spending changes, and then so recommended now in the future, you're going to want to think hard about demonstrating your commitment to the people in your company, and go beyond just openly living your own values corporate wise, but bring new meaning to people by helping them live their own values too. And make that strong effort to leverage and demonstrate local connections to each community wherever you can. Energy matters, as we talked about. The energy sector and the utility sector are back in style for a lot of folks. And Gen Z are particularly there, as well as post 65. And so there's some recommendations around who they might want to focus on. But again, this is all part of the basics and essential services that matter again. Working from home, the big problem is obviously respondents are mixed on those who can work from home. Half of them like it, half of them don't. And the biggest challenge is that basic human connections that may or may not have anything to do with the actual job itself, but it's just that social isolation. And it's about strangers. So we talked a little bit about that, and surprisingly, how many people are really into, generally speaking, more charity, more charitable giving, more altruism towards random strangers. Some folks with their sense of renewed religious faith. So when you're doing your strategy around living your own organizational values, is helping people and helping people live theirs. We might be mindful of the fact that this altruism is something that's out there right now. So you may want to jump on that wherever possible. Plus, it's just the right thing. Okay, again, so I didn't show a lot of the demographic slides. It's about 130 slides on this. We'll make it available to anybody that wants it. Hopefully this gives you a good overview of it. And I'm just going to go to the Q&A because there's some questions here. We acquired the survey respondents through a sample provider. We use Lucid out of New Orleans. So it's just the same sort of way that most people will get their samples. How much of this survey do you feel could be influenced by the recency effect? I think, Eric, what you're talking about is the fact that this is all new. And hopefully that's kind of the point of why we wanted to do it now and do it quickly as possible, because this is all top of mind for folks. What we want to do is, if it helps any folks on the line, specifically around what they're looking at, but generally speaking, we'll go back and do this again in a couple weeks and kind of do this down the road, so we can make sure to be clear on how things change over time. So I think it's pretty recent, and so I think that was kind of what we were going for. But it'll interesting to see how long it lasts, and how long, when things get back to normal, if they ever do, what that's going to look like. But that's why we asked a lot of the questions about what do you think will happen down the road. People don't know any more than we do, but it's just good to get some insights into that. And Christy had the same question. Yes, so Christy had the exact same question. We're going to do this again, and for sure we'll do that, and then we'll call you all back. Anna had the same question. Dr. Suderman had a fantastic question similar to that. Oh, sorry, and then someone needs to know the sample size. The sample size is 800. Given this shift, do you have examples of some brands who are doing this well in this time of crisis? That's a great question. We didn't go into who's doing this well, and I think that's probably a good question that we could sort of get into. I think there's probably lots of brands that are doing it well, but that wasn't part of the survey that we did, and we may want to do that as a follow-up and dig in a little bit deeper, Anna. That's a great idea. Another question, there's a tension between the desire for human connection and concern about crowding in public spaces, implications for festivals, malls, third place businesses. Yeah, so Bob, that's a great question. And I think, like I mentioned, environmental designers and planners are going to have to grapple with what that actually looks like, because that changes a lot. And it may be an issue of we get new technology that helps us isolate or keep away from each other even while we're in close proximity. But that is the $10 billion question there, is how are we going to bridge that desire for human connection and then concerns about crowding in public spaces, for sure. And I mean, the example that we're using right now is going to be one small part of it, is how do we use digital to do that? But that can't cover off everything. So anyway, I think it's an open question that we're going to have to keep a good eye on. Kirsty asked how many responded to the survey. Was it Canada-wide? 800, and it, it didn't hit Quebec. And at the beginning of it, it'll show you where we ended up getting people from. Okay, so are there any other questions? So I see that it looks like folks are putting stuff in the chat. And I'm just going to scroll through the chat. And okay, good. So are there any other questions or thoughts that you wanted to share with the group? And if you put it in the Q&A, then I'll be able to go ahead and jump on this. One question was, did we gather much data from those over 65? Yes, yeah, we got from 65 to 75 plus. The number escapes me, but it was probably about 10% of the data from those folks. Lots of retired folks. From Sandy, she says, locally in Calgary, we're seeing a big jump in business owners using social media like Instagram to connect and update customers. Any comment? The easy comment there is, if that's where people are at, then go to it. Right? If you've got an existing relationship with them there on Instagram, then don't force them to come to some new place to connect with you. Use your existing places. So Instagram is obviously quite visual, so it forces you to get information across to them in a visual sort of way, which is never a bad thing. So the easy thing is, it's about them, and it's about whatever's easier for them, and it's about whatever makes the existing relationship continue and smoothly like transition through this time. So if there's any way that you can connect with folks where they're at, that's fantastic. Hopefully that answers your question, Sandy. And I see Lauren, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask a question, Lauren? I'll put you on. You can talk and unmute if you want. Lauren, did you have a question? Okie dokie. One more comment here, and Lauren pressed it by mistake. No problem. It's like when you're in the airplane and you hit the light button instead of the call for the flight attendant. Okay, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Calgarians got to get some lunch in them, and everybody else has got some other things to do as well. So again, we'll make this available to everybody. And sorry, Mickey's got one quick question. Did the data show if the 40 plus generations are using social media more than they were before, or was that just everyone in general? So Mickey, you know what? I'll go through and go through the demographic breakdown for you if you want. Just ping me afterwards, and I can show you that. But it will be in the report, and it's a pretty good breakdown of where people are at for sure. Okay, so let's give it a give it a call for right now. Thank you so much for joining, folks. That was great, and I really appreciate your questions. Hopefully this can be useful for you. Again, you can have the deck, you can have the raw data if you want to go through all that as well, and we are happy to chat with you more at any point. So I'm gonna Sheena, I don't know if you're still able to jump on, or if there's anything you wanted to end up with, but you can go ahead and do that if you want as well.
Sure. That was great, Mark. Thank you for taking us through all of this work. And like Mark said, we're going to be doing a follow-up survey here in a few weeks to make sure that we're staying consistent and moving alongside how people's feelings and behaviors are changing. So please check with us for future invites. And like Mark said, reach out at any time if you want to discuss these findings specifically in relation to your own business. We're more than happy to hop on a call and brainstorm with you and walk through some strategies. Thank you.
All righty. Thanks again, folks, and stay safe out there, and look forward to connecting with you for the next one. Take care.